Joining us now for the program is Jim Kavanaugh, political analyst and blogger, joining us from New York, and Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. Hello, gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you both to the program. I guess we'll start with you, Jim, in New York. Hope you're safe and doing well. Now, Jim, help us understand this, that Iran, okay, there was a so-called a contract, a treaty, whatever you want, an accord that regulated this very thing. That certain things would be, certain provisions would be met and respected. Iran did not breach any of those and it adhered. But now it's at a point where Iran is expected to basically comply and be the sole party to adhere to the parameters of the JCPOA when no one else is.
Well, that's the agreement, the JCPOA, which was an effective agreement if the purpose really was to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That worked, and Iran was compliant with it, and Iran was perfectly willing to go along with it, although it was putting extra provisions and extra conditions on Iran that no other country in the world had, and certainly Israel as a nuclear state. And, I would like, and most people I think would like, a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East, but it's because of Israel we don't have that. But the point is that the JCPOA was abrogated by the United States, not by Iran, and they're still expecting Iran to live up to all of its commitments. It's not going to go on like that for very long. And the point also is that the real reason the JCPOA was abrogated by the United States was not because Iran was sneaking its way into a nuclear weapon, but because it wasn't enough for Israel. Israel wanted the JCPOA to go away. They want Iran to be forced into an agreement which would constrain their missile program, which Israel is terrified of, and constrain Iran's support resistance groups in the area. That's what they want to replace the JCPOA. They're not afraid of Iran's nuclear weapons program, which didn't exist. They're afraid of those things, which do exist and have a powerful influence on the region. So this is what the United States, following Israel's lead, got out of the JCPOA and is now complaining about it. And really, they have no right to. You're either in it or you're not in it. And if you're not in it, then you can't complain about what other people do.
Thank you, Jim. Tony, welcome to the program. Now, I'm glad that Jim mentioned Israel, because here's an entity that has a nuclear arsenal with zero oversight and zero regulated, Tony, and they've proven, Tony, that they cannot be trusted with 2,000 and 3,000 pound bombs, let alone nuclear weapons. What's all the hoopla about Iran about at this point?
Well, look, this is the International Atomic Energy Authority. Well, why don't we have an International Atomic Weapons Authority? One would have thought this is a little bit more important, really, if you're going to try and regulate warfare and make sure that these weapons are not used in anger. That would seem to be more important. But look, this IAEA report, this organisation led by Rafael Grossi seems to be slowly departing from the real world. It's got this latest initiative has got the backing of, guess what, the NATO countries and other countries, even Austria and others have been very restrained about this, so they're not backing this resolution. So this is a minority. A minority of the IAEA countries are doing this. Basically, what's happening is it's losing touch. The IAEA with a little bit like the International Olympic authorities have lost touch. Many of these international bodies have been seen as targets by the West. They must control all of these international bodies, or at least to get them to go the way they want. I mean, look, we had a friend there just mentioned the Israelis. We've had a threat back in November 2023 from a serving Israeli government minister to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza to wipe out civilians. Now, this is the sort of thing that you would have thought would be rather more important than trying to regulate atomic energy. That's Amichai Elihu back in November 23. So the Israelis are really the problem when it comes to nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. They are the problem. Paul Craig Roberts has spelt out the really important worries that there are around the world with the actual potential use of nuclear weapons. In his article, he said that the West has placed the world's survival in the hands of 3 artificial states. He names Ukraine in Europe, Taiwan in Asia, and Israel in the Middle East. And so, he explains how each of these could potentially turn into a nuclear conflict very easily. So, for example, with Taiwan, if the United States starts bringing its troops in there, that could easily turn into a nuclear conflict. So the IAEA, I'm afraid, it's almost like they're on another planet. They're talking about the regulation of atomic energy, whereas actually the real worry here is that we're getting closer and closer to a potential nuclear war. And that isn't really getting anywhere near like the forum and tension the IAEA has got. And the reason I say this is because we're getting a lot of, I mean, particularly with the Ukraine conflict and the Red Sea conflict, we're getting the censorship of these aggressive acts, such as the taking out of the Russian early warning ballistic missile radar systems, which warn of an incoming nuclear attack from the United States, the attack on the US aircraft carrier and destroyer in the Red Sea by the Yemenis. These are not being reported. And what that tells you is that if there is a retaliation, the world, or at least the Western world's public, will think, and politicians and many journalists will think, oh, it's come out of nowhere, this retaliation. So we're getting into a very dangerous phase where the editors of the newspapers, the owners of the newspapers, the TV stations and the radio are complicit with stoking up nuclear tension, and particularly, declarations of war, potential things like that taking place. So the IAEA really needs to, I think, up its game a little bit and start calling out the Israelis, particularly in this case, the Israelis, for their stockpile of nuclear weapons, which one of their government ministers has actually been threatening to use.
Right, good point. And Jim, now the U.S., you very well know, they've imposed hundreds of sanctions on Iran, all in the name of the country's nuclear program. Over 15 or 1,600 of them by the Trump administration, after Trump opted out of the JCPOA in May of 2018. And Iran has said time and again that these sanctions are cruel, they are unjust, they target things that they're so removed from the country's nuclear programs, it's not even funny, and that it equates to economic terrorism. And it said it will continue to roll back its nuclear commitments under those JCPOA parameters and beyond until it sees some respect and some relief from these crippling sanctions. Now, if the IAEA is so worried, why is that not the objective? If the Board of Governors are so concerned about Iran's nuclear program, they had the perfect tool, they violated it, not Iran. Why is the objective and the impotence and the onus not on them to get back to an accord to give Iran relief from unjust sanctions? Because Iran was playing ball and it did not breach or violate any part of the JCPOA, and it even adhered, if you remember, Jim, over a year and a half after Trump pulled out. It still respected the parameters before it started its rollbacks. Once it saw the Europeans don't care 2 cents to do anything about it, that's when it started finally scaling back commitments, if you remember.
And I know the Iranian government did the conditions of the JCPOA, even though I think the Iranian parliament made a passage that, we've got to get out of this, or we've got to get away from it. So there was a real effort on the part of Iran. Iran has never wanted nuclear weapons. And again, as I'm saying, this isn't about nuclear weapons. It's about isolating Iran. Well, first of all, the IAEA is trying here, as Tony said, under the control and the capture of the U.S., to create some kind of excuse for calling Iran a nuclear threat in some way or another. That's really what it is. Look, it's a very dangerous situation. The Israelis want to widen this war. They have wanted for 15 years, and they've been working with the United States for 15 years to get the United States into a war on Iran. If they get into a war on Iran, Israel will use their nuclear weapons against Iran. They're not going to pass up that opportunity. And it's an extremely dangerous situation. So Israel is the nuclear power and the aggressive war-making and nuclear-making threat in the region. And unfortunately, not only does an Israeli minister say they should use nuclear weapons, but you've now got Lindsey Graham, you've got American politicians saying we should nuke Gaza, we should do like we did with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we should let the Israelis do that. So this is a kind of fever about, protecting Zionism, and Iran is seen as a threat to that, has been seen as a threat to that, not because they have nuclear weapons, but because they have other weapons that are powerful, that are precision ballistic missiles, that are capable of hurting Israel badly, and because they've been supporting the resistance groups around the region, which hurt Israel badly. And Israel wants to do away with all of these things now, and they want to do away with it once and for all, and it's a very dangerous spot we're in. So this is another little arena, the IAEA, where the United States is working on behalf of Israel to get Iran designated as some kind of threat, some kind of nuclear threat, and fear-monger the world about that, so that if Israel and the United States decide to attack Iran, that's going to be an excuse for it.
And Tony, final thoughts with you. I want to put that same question to you, pretty much. Why is the onus on Tehran to allay Western concerns to shut down its peaceful nuclear program, its missile program, and its space program, for that matter? Tony?
Well, it's not. At the end of the day, it's up to Iran to do what it decides it wants to do to protect its own people. So in a way, what they're trying to do is gaslight. This is almost like my weekly radio program. I start off by saying thank you for turning off the psychopath in the corner, because what we're getting from so much of the Western press here is diseased. I mean, for example, the way that they just every news story about Russia is some sort of disaster. We've had a problem with our health services computers. It's Russia's fault. Of course, if you bother to look into these things from Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks, you'll see that it's quite easy to fake a cyber attack, even in the details there. So at the end of the day, I think what we're looking at now is it's 80 years today since D-Day, which is when the Americans and the British and Canadians and others invaded the continent and France in Normandy. And what we were doing was at the last minute, in a way, actually helping the Russians to attack the Nazis in 1944, and the Russians have been waiting for a long, long time for that, and so it's rather irritating that there's no mention of the Russians as being our colleagues in the Second World War in defeating Hitler. So that's the sort of thing we're looking at. Most of that generation now, I'm afraid to say, are dead, and there's a few left, a very few, and it's almost as if the powers that be in the West are waiting until all those memories of fighting the Nazis in World War II, fighting alongside the Russians, have died before they remake history and they start turning the Russians into the big bad wolf, the big enemy, when actually they were, of course, our friends, and they did the biggest job in defeating Nazism. And it's a very cynical attitude that they're waiting, I think, until all these veterans have died before they're now starting to turn on Russia, turn on Iran, and they have actually become the modern Nazis. They believe that they can invade any country they want at will, and they can use their media in order to basically confidence trick their population into going along with it, at least for a few days, while it matters. Maybe the population, though, in the West is slowly catching up to this game.
Interesting stuff, gentlemen. Thank you both for joining us on the program, and stay safe to both of you. Jim Kavanaugh, they're joining us from New York, and Tony Gosling joining us from Bristol. And viewers, that brings us to the conclusion of this segment of your Press TV's News Review program. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.